The Fence by Jose Garcia Villa. They should have stood apart, away from each other, those two nipa houses. There should have been a lofty impenetrable wall between them, so that they should not stare so coldly, so starkly, at each other, just staring, not saying a word, not even a cruel word. Only a yard of parched soil separated them, a yard of brittle-crusted earth with only a stray weed or two to show there was life still in its bosom. They stood there on the roadside, they two alone, neighborless but for themselves, and they were like two stealthy shadows, each avid to betray the other. Queer old houses. So brown were the nipa leaves that walled and roofed them that they looked musty, gloomy. One higher than the other, pyramid-roofed, it tried to assume the air of mastery, but in vain. For though the other was low, wind-bent, supported without by luteous bamboo poles against the aggressiveness of the weather, it had its eyes to stare back as haughtily as the other, windows as desolate as the souls of the occupants of the house, as sharply angular as the intensity of their hatred. From the road these houses feared no enemy from the length, from the dust, of the road. They were unfenced. But of each other they were afraid. There ran a green, house-high, bamboo fence through the narrow ribbon of thirsty earth between them, proclaiming that one side belonged to one house, to it alone. The other side to the other, and to it alone. Formerly there had been no bamboo fence, there had been no weeds. There had been 2 rows of vegetables, one to each house, and the soil was not parched but soft and rich. But something had happened and the fence came to be built, and the vegetables that were so green began to turn pale, then paler, and yellow and brown. Those of each house would not water their plants, for if they did, would not water their water spread to the other side and quench too the thirst of fetches and mustards not theirs? Little by little the plants had died, the soil had cracked with neglect, on both sides of the fence. 2 women had built that fence. 2 tanned country women. One of them had caught her husband with the other one night, and the next morning she had gone to the bamboo clumps near the river Pasig, and felled canes with her woman's strength. She left her baby son at home, heeded not the little cries. And one by one that hot afternoon, she shouldered the canes to her home. She was tired, very tired, yet that night she could not sleep. When morning dawned, she rose and went back to the back of the house, and began to split the bamboos. Her husband noticed her, but said nothing. By noon, Aling Byung was driving tall bamboo splits into the narrow ribbon of yard. Sounded her crude hammer. When her husband asked her what she was doing, she answered, "I am building a fence." "What for?" he asked. "I need a fence." And then, too, even Aling Sibia, the other woman, a childless widow, asked inoffensively, "What are you doing, Aling Byung?" "I am building a fence." "What for?" "I need a fence, Aling Sibia. Please do not talk to me again." And with that, Aling Sibia had felt hurt. Out of spite, she too had gone to the bamboo clumps to fell canes. After she had split them, tried though she was, she began to thrust them into the ground, on the same straight line as Aling Byung's but from the opposite end. The building of the fence progressed from the opposite end. The building of the fence progresses from the ends centerward. Aling Byung drove in the last split. And the fence completed, oily perspiration wetting the brows of the 2 young women, they gazed pridefully at the majestic wall of green that now separated them. Not long after the completion of the fence, Aling Byung's husband disappeared, and never came back. Aling Byung took the matter passively, and made no effort to find him. She had become a hardened woman, The fence hid all the happenings in each house from those who lived in the other. The other side was to each a beyond, dark and elemental prejudice, and no one dared encroach on it. So the months passed, and each woman lived as though the other were non-existent. But early one night, from beyond the fence, Aling Biang heard cries from Aling Sibia. Unwilling to pay any heed to them, she extinguished the light of the petrol kink and laid herself down beside her child. But, in spite of all, the cries of the other woman made her uneasy. She stood up, went to the window that faced the fence, and cried from there. "What is the matter with you, Aling Sibia?" Faintly from the other side came, "Aling Biang, please go to the town and get me a heelute." "What do you need a heelute for?" asked Aling Biang. "I am going to deliver a child, Aling Biang, and I am alone. Please go, fetch a heelute." Aling Biang stood there by the window a long time. She knew when child it was that was coming as the child of Aling Sibia. She stood motionless, the wind brushing her face coldly. What did she care if Aling Sibia was to undergo childbirth? The wind blew colder and pierced the thinness of her shirt. She decided to lie down and sleep. Her body struck against her child's as she did so, and the child moaned. The other child, too, could be moaning like that. Like her child. From the womb of Aling Sibia, the wrong womb. Hastily, Aling Biang stood up, wound her tapis round her waist, covered her shoulders with a cheap shawl. The cry that called her. The cry of a life. She descended the bamboo steps. They creaked in the night. The fence grew moldy and inclined to one side. The child of Aling Biang grew up into sickly boy, with hollow dark eyes and shaggy hair, and the child that was born to Aling Sibia grew up into a girl. A girl with rugged features, a simian face, and a very narrow brow. But not a word had passed across the fence since that night. The boy king was not allowed to play by the roadside, for if he did, would he not know were on the other side of the fence? For his realm he had only his home and the little backyard. Sometimes, he would loiter along the narrow strip of yard beside the fence, and peep surreptitiously through the slits. And he could catch glimpses of a girl, dark complex Ionid, flat-nosed on the other side. She was an ugly girl, even uglier than he was, but she was full-muscled, healthy. As he peeped, his body, like a thin reed pressed against the fungus canes, would be breathless. The flat-nosed girl intoxicated him. His loose architecture of a body, so that it pulsed, vibrated cruelly with the leap in his blood. The least sound of the wind against the nipa wall of their house would startle him, as though he had been caught, surprised, in his clandestine passion. A wave of frigid coldness would start in his chest and expand until he was all cold and shivering. Watching that girl only intensified his loneliness. Watching that girl of whom he knew nothing, except that from them it was not right to know each other. When his mother caught him peeping, she would scold him, and he would turn quickly about, his convex back pressed painfully against the fence. "Did I not tell you never to peep through that fence? Go up." And he would go up without answering a word, because the moment he tried to reason out things, prolonged coughs would seize him and shake his thin body unmercifully. At night, as he lay on the bamboo floor, notes of a guitar would reach his ears. The notes were metallic, clanking, and at the middle of the nocturne they stopped abruptly. Who played the raucous notes? Who played the only music he had ever heard in his life? And why did the player never finish his music? And lying beside his mother, he felt he wanted to rise and go down the bamboo steps to the old forbidden fence, and see who it was that was playing. But Aling Byung would stir and ask, "Are you feeling cold, king? Here is the blanket." Poor mother, she did not know that it was she who was making the soul of this boy so cold, so barren, so desolate. And one night, after Aling Byung had prepared his bedding beside her, king approached her and said, "I will sleep by the door, Nanai. I want to sleep alone. I am grown up. I am 15. He folded his mat and tucked it under an arm, carrying a countryman-cased pillow in one thin hand, and marched stoically to the place he mentioned. When the playing came, he stood up and went down the stairs and moved towards the bamboo fence. He leaned against it and listened, enthralled, to the music. When it ceased, he wanted to scream in protest, but a strangling cough seized him. He choked, yet his neck craned and his eyes strained to see who had been the player. His lips did not move, but his soul wept. "It is she!" And he wanted to hurl himself against the fence to break it down. But he knew that even that old, mildewed fence was stronger than he. Stronger, stronger than the loneliness of his soul, stronger than his soul itself. The boy king, pallid, tubercular, watched his mother with sunken, hating eyes from the window. She was mending the fence, because now it leaned to their side and many of the old stakes had decayed. She substituted fresh ones for these, until finally, among the weather-beaten ones, rose bold green splits like stout corporals among squads of unhealthy soldiers. From the window, the boy king asked nervously, "Why do you do that, mother?" "Why? Why? It needs reinforcing," replied his mother. "Why? Why?" he exclaimed in protest. His mother stopped hammering. She stared at him cruelly. "I need it," she declared forcefully, the veins on her forehead rising out clearly. "Your mother needs it. You need it too." King cowered from the window. He heard again. That night no playing came from beyond the fence. And king knew why. Tizical king, 18-year-old bony king, lying ghastly pale on the mat all the time, waiting for the music from the other side of the fence that had stopped 3 years ago. And tonight was Christmas Eve. King's Christmas Eve. He must be happy tonight. He must be made happy tonight. At one corner of the room his mother crooned to herself. A biblia was on the table, but no one read it. They did not know how to read. But they knew it was Christmas Eve. Aling Byung said, "The Lord will be born tonight. The Lord will be born tonight," echoed her son. "Let us pray, king." King stood up. His emaciated form looked so pitiful that his mother said, "Better lie down again, king. I will pray alone." But king did not lie down. He moved slowly to the door and descended into the backyard. His mother would pray. Could she pray? His soul asked. He stood motionless. And then he saw the fence that his mother had built and strengthened to crush his soul. He ran weakly, groggily, to it, allured by its forbidding, crushing sternness. He peeped hungrily between the splits, saw her. His dry lips mumbled, tried to make her hear his word. "Play for me tonight!" He saw that she heard. Her ugly face turned sharply to the fence that separated him and her. He wept. He had spoken to her, the first time. He laid himself down as soon as he was back in the house. He turned his face toward the window, to wait for her music. He drew his blanket closer round him so that he should not feel cold. The moonlight that poured into the room pointed at his face, livid, anxious, hoping, and at a little, wet, red smudge on the blanket where it touched his lips. Cicadas sang and leaves of trees rustled. A gorgeous moon sailed westward across the sky. Dark-skinned bats occasionally lost their way into the room. A pale silken moth flew in to flirt with the flame of kerosene kink. And then the cicadas had tired of singing. The moon was far above at its zenith now. The bats had found their way out of the room. The moth now lay signed on the table. Beside, he realized now that the fence between their houses extended into the heart of this girl. "The Lord is born," announced Aling Byung, for it was midnight. "He is born," said her son, his ears still ready for her music, because the fence did not run through his soul. The moon descended. At 2 a.m. King's eyes were closed, and his hands were cold. His mother wept. His heart beat no more. 2:03 a.m. only. A few minutes after, and from beyond the fence came the notes of a guitar. The notes of a guitar, metallic, clanking, raucous. Notes of the same guitar. And she who played it finished her nocturne that morn. Aling Byung stood up from beside her son, approached the window, stared accusingly outside, and said in a low, resentful voice, "They are mocking. Who would play at such a time of morn as this? Because my son is dead?" But she saw only the fence she had built and strengthened, stately white in the matutinal moonlight. The end.